Good afternoon, everyone. We'll get started shortly. We'll just give a moment for everyone to join through the waiting room. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for what I know is going to be a really interesting conversation. My name is Liz McAuliffe. I am a board member of the New Zealand Chamber of Commerce here in Singapore, and when I'm not being a board member, my day-to-day job, I'm the HR director for Deloitte Asia Pacific based here in Singapore. Joining me today is Kirsty Holston, who is the Regional Director, Singapore for Hayes Recruitment, and Shay Peters, Managing Director for Australia and New Zealand of Robert Walters, joining us all the way from Wellington, which is fantastic. A little bit about this afternoon and why we're doing this. We all have a level of interest, I suspect, in the recent opening of the borders between New Zealand for New Zealanders outside of New Zealand. And we wanted to take a look at the employment market, both here in Singapore and also in New Zealand. There has been a huge number of change and uncertainty and somewhat volatility over the last couple of years, which we've all experienced to varying degrees. There's extensive talk about the Great Resignation, the Great Reshuffle, and we really wanted to understand what was happening. So a big thank you to our sponsors this afternoon, Hayes and Robert Walters, for allowing us to put this webinar on, and a big welcome to everyone who is joining from the ASEAN Business Alliance Network around the region. And on that topic, I'm really interested to know where everyone is around the region. We've got just over 30 participants on the call this afternoon. And if you can pop just in the chat the city and or country that you are in at the moment, it would be great to see where we all are, as I know that will contribute to a really rich conversation as well. So we'll just have a couple of moments. I can see some people, Singapore, some people from New Zealand, people from Wellington, Malaysia, welcome from Malaysia as well. Loads, Vietnam, Singapore, this is great. Lots of Wellingtonians, which is always nice to see as well. And I was saying to Shay before we started how great it is to see, albeit a somewhat gloomy Wellington, and to see my hometown in real life is always a treat as well. We've got some fantastic representation, as we can see, from right around the Southeast Asia and broader Asia Pacific region. I'm very jealous, David, that you are remotely working from Bali this week. I think you take the cake for having the best location as well. So look, this afternoon, we really want this to be super interactive. We're going to hear from Shay and then from Kirsty in terms of their perspectives on the New Zealand and then Singapore employment market. I've got some conversation starters to kick off with them, but really this is about the people on this webinar getting the most information they can from some experts in the talent acquisition space. So please put your questions in the chat. We will come to them after Shay and Kirsty have presented, and we'll look forward to a really rich discussion. So without any further ado, Shay, I will hand over to you to kick us off and learn a little bit more about what's been happening down under.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you. I guess to kind of kick things off, and I get an appreciation from everyone's standpoint who's kind of logging on to the webinar. It's always kind of intriguing when you're based overseas to hear about what's happening in your local job market. I remember when I was in London many years ago, I was always intrigued. I was only away for a couple of years at the time, but when I was away, I was always intrigued as to what the job market was doing at home and what type of opportunities could kind of lie for me when I came back. So completely get everyone's kind of standpoint on that. I thought to kick things off, what I would do is give a little bit of background, a little bit of context to kind of where we are now. And as we all know, 2020 rolled around, and there was there's a fair amount of optimism in the New Zealand market. And all of a sudden, we started hearing about COVID-19 and this new thing that was going to take the world by storm a little bit, and we did see that eventuate. Initially, how that impacted the job market was really interesting. So, immediately everyone kind of hunkered down. There was a bit of fear around a potential wave of mass redundancies around the economy, and rightfully so. And we did actually survey a number of job seekers at the time and current employees. And then everyone's number one motivating factor at that time in a job was job security. And that had actually moved quite significantly. I think that was around number 5, and we'd kind of surveyed that in the year previous. So I think that's an important point to note. We did see, a lot of impact from the economy, but this was mostly felt in the hospitality and the retail market, and obviously within tourism as well. Outside of that, it actually didn't really eventuate too much. I think what we saw were organizations using COVID-19 and the eventualities that follow to right-size their organization. We had seen organizations getting quite large through an optimistic economy. And what we did see, like I mentioned, was potentially right-sizing and organizations seeing an opportunity to create some efficiencies. And so that did actually play out, but not a mass redundancy like everyone was really concerned about. Obviously, there was a lot of unknown, and that was what was driving everyone's kind of fear at the time. We were going into lockdown. We didn't know how long it was going to last. But as things tended to play out, we actually didn't see too much negative impact overall on the economy in the corporate and professional space. We did see, April to October in 2020, particularly slow hiring rates, which was unsurprising. So we didn't see mass redundancies, but we didn't see people leaving jobs to go to different jobs for fear of last one in, first one out. There was definitely a fear of that. And also we saw organizations probably hunker down a little bit, and there wasn't too much aspirational hiring going on. I think organizations were really trying to see what the lay of the land was going to be like when the country came out of lockdown. So that was kind of 2020 in a nutshell, and that kind of rolled through into November and December, where we did see things slightly start to increase again from a hiring perspective, but then we also know New Zealand does tend to shut right down and slow right down in December. What would we typically see in the first quarter of any year? So typically January and February are very, very slow from a New Zealand hiring perspective, but we didn't actually see this in 2021. 2021, there was actually a big spike in hiring in January and February compared to a lot of the other compared to the other quarter ones I've seen prior to that. We had seen a pent-up demand for hiring. So organizations that had held on to vacancies for a number of months actually went to market in Q1. They wanted to start the year fast. Organizations and offices were almost all back in full swing by that time, back into office physically. And so we did see, a lot of new interviewing going on during that time, and a lot of increase in hiring. And this was off the back of obviously 2 successive slow quarters. And from a 2021 perspective, things just didn't slow down for us. Again, this is outside of hospitality and retail and tourism, which are markets we don't typically operate in. But outside of that, in the professional and corporate job market within the public and the private sectors, the job market was extremely busy and demand was extremely high for our services. And I think that's off the back of a couple of reasons. One, obviously border restrictions really restricted the amount of labour supply in New Zealand. So that was really putting a strain on things. And also what we were seeing are people that were still, the people started to look again at different roles, and they started to move again. But without that supply, we saw employers aggressively competing for talent over the course of 2021. Off the back of this, we did see wage inflation in a few sectors, specifically within the professional spaces. And overall, New Zealand's GDP increased by 4.9% in 2021, which is a really, that's a big spike. I haven't personally seen a labour market as busy as last year. I haven't seen a labour shortage as significantly felt as we did last year. And bearing in mind, I've been back from London since late 2009. So, that's 13 years back now in the New Zealand economy. And it was wages were high, contract rates were really high, and also, supply was really, really short. And this, I guess, rolls us around into 2022 and why everyone's keen to hear about what's going to happen this year. I think this year is going to be an extremely interesting year for the labour market in New Zealand. Everyone's talking about the Great Resignation, or I think the latest term coined as of this morning, or fairly recent anyway, as the Great Reset. I think it's almost, it could be a great reshuffle. A number of these great things are flowing around at the moment. But what I see is probably a bit of a twofold impact on labour supply. So yes, I think we're going to see an outflow of talent going out the door from a New Zealand perspective. I think we've got 2 or 3 years of people's OEs that they weren't able to go on previously, which is, that's going to force the supply of labour to move offshore. I mean, that's only a natural thing for a labour market that is fairly transient in its very nature. The other aspect that I think is going to really put pressure on New Zealand labour supply is the fact that cost of living is actually materially higher in New Zealand at the moment and can be felt at all levels. I think this puts us under pressure from our traditional markets where New Zealand labour traditionally flows into, like the UK and possibly through Asia. But I actually think there's going to be pressure felt from Australia as well, because we've actually seen some Australian organisations trying to raid New Zealand talent fairly recently. With, this could be large professional services firms running specific campaigns across New Zealand. New Zealand's a bit of an easy target at the moment for these organisations because it's not a massive move away for people moving to Australia. So they're still accessible where they can come home and see family. But cost of living is actually, it's being marketed as being a lot cheaper in Australia than it is in New Zealand at the moment. The cost of housing is cheaper. And it's definitely probably a few degrees warmer. Well, specifically, there's a few degrees warmer than Wellington is anyway, I can assure you. So that's going to put pressure on the New Zealand labour supply, particularly at what I see as the doer level. And I see the doer level around 3 to 8 years qualified within any individual discipline. So we're going to see an outflow of the doers go out of New Zealand and into these other labour markets. I do think we are going to get, as border restrictions are eased, I do think the supply of labour will start to come back to New Zealand. But for returning New Zealanders, I think these are New Zealanders that are now probably in more senior level roles. They might be at management or leadership level, in leadership level roles, which again doesn't take the pressure off or ease the pressure off that doer level. Who's going to be doing the work in New Zealand as opposed to managing or leading work? And I think we haven't actually probably seen that dynamic before. So to me, that's going to be an interesting one. I do think that professional services disciplines, they're the ones that I see will go offshore. I see where we might gain talent is through the tech industry. I think that countries throughout Asia we might see immigration flow coming through the tech industry into New Zealand. So that might be one market that does actually net gain out of border restrictions easing. But like I mentioned, some of the more traditional disciplines and professions, I think that's where we might find some specific challenges. Next slide, please. So as I noted, a couple of markets where we do expect to see job growth coming up in New Zealand over the course of the next 12 months. Probably one market in particular that we have seen continue to grow, and I think we will see continue to grow in New Zealand, are in the tech and transformation markets. Those markets in New Zealand, there's some massive projects going on within the public sector that's really pushing this growth. There's some ambitious tech transformations going on within the public sector that's driving this. I still think we see there is definitely a tech startup community in New Zealand that's continuing to get nurtured and growing, which is cool to see across the local market. And I think that's where that market in particular, we will see growth. And like I said before, some of that talent hopefully will flow into New Zealand, which will basically culminate in that market continuing to grow. Another market that I think we are going to see some buoyancy in is the customer experience market. And CX globally, there's a massive push around this at the moment. But I think we're specifically seeing this in New Zealand, which I think traditionally we may have been slow going or slow to the punch around the customer experience market. But I think as industries and specializations continue to evolve in New Zealand, I think the customer experience market will grow. I think we'll see specialists that manage digital content and data. I think this is going to be specifically relevant in the retail and telecommunications sector. So I think these are markets where we are going to see this move. And also within e-commerce, which we all know is going to be in particularly high demand. As the property market continues to, there's always been pressure in this market in New Zealand, but it is continuing to grow again. I think the property market and anyone servicing the property market and the professions will, again, that will be a market that we see grow. And property consultancy, property lawyers, I think that's a space that we're going to see some buoyancy in. So next slide, please. So I guess quickly, tips for employers when hiring, and obviously not everyone that's on this webinar is going to be particularly interested in all of these things, but I thought it was worth noting some of these points as they are quite pertinent. 88% of employers are very concerned about skill shortage and competition for talent. And I think that's really fierce and more than we've seen in most years. So I think potential employers really need to harness the international talent pool. We need to ensure we're not restrained by a typical employee-employer engagement model. I think we need to see some more flexibility in terms of utilizing a contingent labor pool, an offshore labor pool, a permanent labor pool, and a fixed-term labor pool. I think flexibility to approach is going to be really important. I think employers really need to start to invest in learning and development strategies and see that as a cradle to grave scenario with potential employees as they're joining. And it's not about just when they join, they have to probably factor in overseas travel at some point in time for New Zealanders, but how do they get these people back? How do employers put in place learning and development strategies that get these people back at the end of their OEs as well? So I think that's something else that potential employers need to look at. And one of the most important points for any employer in today's market is their articulation of their employee value proposition. What is it about them that makes them compelling? We know a generational thing is all about employees from a generational perspective want to join employers that have a story. So I think making sure that they know their story in the EVP is very, very important. Next slide, please. And so probably more pertinent for the audience are tips for employees when looking to come home. one of the most important questions that we often get asked is, how early should you start looking to engage the labour market in the jurisdiction that you're looking to move into? And my typical advice here is look to start within a kind of a 3-month scenario. So making sure that you're starting to put feelers out within that 3-month mark, I think it's very, very important. Don't engage outside that. New Zealand notice periods are typically, they're typically only 4 weeks at most levels, and at a very senior level, they could be 3 to 6 months. So thinking within that 3-month mark is probably the ideal time to start putting your details out there with organizations or with potential recruitment consultancies. Make sure your CV is up to date, and that's obviously basic advice, but one of the things that we're trying to get people to think about, like it's very important for an employee to join an organization that has a story. I think it's really important that employees need to try and market their story very effectively, especially when they're coming from offshore back into the New Zealand market. How does your experience translate back to the local economy? What I would advise is making sure you're putting together a really effective digital video profile of yourself where you can tell your story firsthand, and making sure that you're articulating how your experience fits back into the New Zealand market. This is becoming increasingly common, and I think it has a lot of impact. It has a lot of impact with differentiating you from the crowd when coming back in, and making sure that your story is getting out there. And also making sure you're just updating, really basic things like your LinkedIn profile, when you can locate your location of interest to reflect the New Zealand market, and editing your strapline to potentially highlight that you are coming back or you are looking for opportunities. LinkedIn is now a very, very effective tool for any potential employee. And one of the things I would say, because it's a really employee or talent short market at the moment, whether it's Robert Walters or another professional recruitment consultancy with an international footprint, get in touch with these organizations early. We're actually starting to hear about opportunities in the market well before that, where they're actually out in the market and being marketed or advertised. We're hearing about these opportunities, and we're often being increasingly involved with workforce planning conversations with some of our bigger clients now. So we'll see opportunities that are starting, that we know will exist now or in 3 to 6 months time, because employers are contacting us because they know that there's such a dearth of talent, and they're trying to put themselves at the head of the pack. So don't be afraid to get in touch with a recruitment consultancy with an international footprint. I think that is an important point. And just, sorry, next slide, please. Some interesting, facts and figures that we are seeing from a New Zealand market perspective. And this is unsurprising, and it probably mirrors a global trend, but 47% of all candidates now are really backing a flexible working arrangements. We see it can work. We know it can work. I think in any form of employer that would advocate having a 5-day-a-week office environment now, they'd be put to the back of any kind of pile when an employee is looking at moving to an organization. So that's probably unsurprising. 44% would actually decline, a job opportunity off the back of that, which is also unsurprising. But this fact is going to be the challenge. A strong workplace culture is what employees are valuing the most in any employer across New Zealand. And there's an obvious, it's obviously almost counterintuitive to what you're seeing in those previous 2 points to a certain extent, because it's going to be really hard to articulate a workforce culture or a workplace culture when you're not in the workforce, when you're not actually in that workplace all the time. And I think that's something that New Zealand employers are going to be grappling with over the next 12 to 24 months. But outside of that, New Zealand, it definitely has its challenges, and I made those, abundantly clear on a global scale, in terms of, some of the challenges we face around cost of living and where talent's going to go. But that also, you know, therein lies the opportunity in New Zealand. If you're backing yourself with a really strong skill set coming into a New Zealand market, you're going to be able to make sways pretty quickly back in and really showcase your own talent and make that stand out from a local perspective. So if you're wanting to, you know, there's a real opportunity for individuals to really kind of fast track their career and making a move back to New Zealand as well. And like I said, there has been a lot of pressure on salaries. So salaries and contract rates are higher than what I've seen across a 13-year period about moving back to New Zealand. So there's definitely some pluses as well. So that's my bit of the presentation done. So I'll kind of hand back across to everyone else. Hopefully that's been useful.
Excellent. Thank you, Shade. Some really good points. And I know I've written down a number of questions to pick up with you. Now we're going to head a little bit further north, back up to the equator. And Kirsty, it'd be great to hear from you in terms of what's happening in Singapore. I think there's some similarities, but certainly some quite marked differences as well. So I'll hand over to you.
Sure. Just give me 1 minute. Liz, could you flash up the slides? Sorry, guys, just give us a minute.
Sharing now?
Yeah, that's nice. Thank you. Thank you all. So firstly, hello everyone. Thank you to Liz for the introduction and to Rachel at the Chamber for inviting me along here today. My name is Kirsty Holston. I am the Regional Director leading the Hays operations here in Singapore. Prior to being based in Singapore, I was based in Guangzhou in mainland China for almost 5 years, and where I did spend the bulk of the 2020 pandemic. Prior to this, I spent a number of years working in our Hays Perth office. However, I am originally from New Zealand, born and bred in Christchurch, and I am very much looking forward to my quarantine-free trip home in 2 weeks after a long period of being away. So just looking quickly at Hays as an organisation, we have an expanding footprint globally. Liz, if you just flick over to the next slide. And like many companies, we've really experienced a very strong rebound post-COVID-19. We have now over 11,500 permanent employees, with 100 based in Singapore. And just to give that rebound, I think a bit of context here, when I arrived in Singapore in January 2021, so that's just over a year ago, we have increased our own consulting headcount by 40%, which I think really does highlight the trading conditions for a recruitment firm. Without a doubt, and I think Shay sort of captured this as well, this hiring market is certainly the best that I've ever seen in the 15 years that I've worked in the industry. So just turning now to the next slide, today I will be sharing with you just a couple of key highlights from our recent market survey on hiring trends across Asia. In fact, the report was actually released last week, so it is fairly hot off the press. We do conduct this market report and survey globally and right across APAC as well. So if anybody's looking at grabbing hold of a copy or having a look at more of the micro detail, it is available on our website. So the insights and trends itself is based on a survey we conduct with over 9,500 professionals, and that's across the 5 markets that Hays operate in Asia. Today I will just be touching on the Singapore components, and like I said, the full version is available online. So just turning now to the next slide, you will see here, along with the rest of Asia, Singaporean employers are particularly optimistic about the year ahead. As you can see, they are much more upbeat than they were last year, with 73% expecting business activity to increase. More employers have also said that hiring freezes will be lifted this year. And as a result, we have 61% of employers planning to increase their permanent staff levels in the next 12 months. For Hays here in Singapore, we've just had our strongest ever first half year set of results from July to December. And we're placing more people into permanent jobs than we ever have done before. So it's a good time to obviously be working in the recruitment sector. However, looking at the skills shortages, employers in Singapore seem to be less confident about their ability to hire skilled talent this year compared to last year. And we are certainly seeing this on the ground here day to day. 42% of employers said they were not confident about their ability to hire the talent they need in 2022 to support their business growth and objectives. And when asked why they think there is skill shortages in the organisations, over half have said that higher compensation is being offered elsewhere. It is the number one reason why organisations are concerned about being unable to attract the right talent. Secondary to that was that the skills needed are too niche, in the current market, and that their current organisations lack the learning and development opportunities to upskill their current employees. Turning now to the next slide, and I thought this was particularly interesting given how much chatter there is in the media and what we do hear about things like the Great Resignation. But making matters worse and accelerating the talent shortage is the fact we're seeing the lowest number of active job seekers in the 5 years that we've been, in the past 5 years of running this survey. So active job seekers we define as a candidate that actively applies for a job advertised online. They submit their CV and then we commence the screening and interview process. So that number is currently sitting at the lowest we've seen in a really long time. And that isn't just at one particular job level or in one particular industry, that is across the board. And when talking to LinkedIn, for example, who's one of our very close partners, they are reporting the same set of information in that the applications coming through are at an all-time low, and it is across the board. It's across all industries and job levels. So only 26% of respondents to our survey actually said they were actively looking for a new role, which very much backs up the day-to-day experience that we are seeing as recruiters. So this indicates, I suppose, that employers are on the right track when it comes to retention strategies, with progressively fewer people determined to change jobs. Having said that, though, the primary motivator for someone to change jobs is still salary package. It's actually it's been identified as more important than previous years, with 78% of respondents selecting better salary package as their main driver. I thought interesting too, which is a bit of an anomaly, I think, on the back of the pandemic, but the search for better health insurance overtook career progression to make it into the top 3 motivators as well this year, which I think is a unique reflection of the times that we've been through. Looking at why people choose to stay at the current role, work-life balance remains one of the top reasons, alongside salaries, but also being exposed to new challenges and lateral career moves. So I guess the key point to note here is whilst employees, they might not be actively looking for a new job in that they're not applying for roles advertised online. What we are finding is that should the right opportunity come along, the passive job seekers or your current employees might not hesitate to at least explore the conversation. And I think once the informal discussion starts, then often somebody that may have not identified as a job seeker can become a job seeker when they start to see the opportunities and the salary packages and career progression that's been offered by alternative companies. I think this does help explain, a lot of what we see around the Great Resignation. The passive job seeker market is really high. It's sitting at higher levels than we've seen previously, and helps explain the extensive movement in the market. So employers really need to put equal focus. It is a really challenging time, but they need to put equal focus on attracting and retaining their best talent simultaneously, to ensure that they are able to grow and bring in new people to the organisation, but also to ensure that their current staff are happy and fulfilled in their roles. If we just take a closer look on the next slide in regards to the salary expectations, I think this slide sort of says it all really. We can see there's a considerable gap between employers' expectations and what employers are anticipating in terms of the increases that they will offer this year. Of the 84% of employers that intend to increase salaries, over half are planning on an increment up to 3%, whilst 29% said that increments will be in the 3 to 6% range. Now, in contrast, and anecdotally, what we're actually seeing day to day is candidates are talking to us about their expectations of an increase 20 to 30%. I actually met a candidate recently that was looking at closer to 40% increase on their current salary to change jobs. So whilst the salary expectation gap, I think, is always the case, I've done a number of these salary and market reports over the years, and there is always a gap. I think the fact that people are increasingly prioritising their pay packages post-pandemic, and likely there has been a stagnation for the past 1 to 2 years of salaries being increased, in the market by current employers. This does create some real risk for employers, and this will need to be managed pretty strategically to ensure you retain your best people. Looking now to the next slide, and I think one key way of doing that is looking at remote working and flexibility. These are ranking extremely high on the agenda and candidate motivators. 74% of candidates prefer a home-based or flexible mobile working arrangement, along with 57% preferred a change of work hours outside of the traditional 9 to 5 work hours, for example. So this means employers need to embrace new hybrid working models and develop policies that offer better work flexibility, as well as supporting employees' mental health and well-being. People do expect more from their organisation these days, other than just being an employer, and increased discussion, visibility, support around mental health and well-being has become a really critical point to that. For any of you guys on the call that are based in Singapore, you would know that we've essentially been working from home here for the best part of 2 years, and I think people really have reorganised their lives, to accommodate to that. And I think if we're realistically asking people to reconstruct their lives back to what they were doing in 2019 and how their work life integrated back then we are going to cause real issues when trying to attract the best talent. I think Shay had it on a slide there as well. We face very challenging hiring ability with organisations that are not offering a lot of flexibility in terms of location and work hours, when there's just so many opportunities in the market now for candidates to secure a great opportunity that doesn't require them to go to the office 5 days a week. So it's a hugely valuable retention strategy when it's done right. I don't know if anyone has all the answers right now. We're not entirely sure what the long-term impacts of hybrid working environments will be, the impact on graduates learning how to do a job for the first time, or whatever the circumstance. but it is what the candidates are asking for. Work-life balance and flexible working options, I think, were actually 2 of the top 5 reasons why people who are happy with their current employer will choose to stay with the organisation. So it's super, super important. Just turning now to the next slide, I'm just touching very briefly here on international talent and employment pass in Singapore. So overseas experience is viewed really positively. There is a keen interest to attract overseas returnees, not just into Singapore, but I'd say that's right across Asia. This is often done through university partnerships. We actually have a dedicated business unit at Hayes that specialises in overseas returnees, graduates and also experienced people. Additionally, we did see a reduced number of employment passes for foreign workers being issued last year due to COVID, largely I think based around the entry restrictions. However, this challenge has since eased off. And we do note here that new EP regulations take effect next year in September 2023. This will essentially lay out a criteria framework, not only for the individual applicants, but also for the employer that they're intending to join. The set of criteria will need to be met in both components of the employer and also the individual in order for the EP to be approved. And just lastly, we've included a couple of recommendations for employers and then also employees if looking for a new role. I've touched on a couple of these already, but just as a call out for employers, firstly, it's critical to manage the salary expectation gap that we've discussed amongst your current workforce, and also whilst in pursuit of increasing your permanent headcount. One way to manage this is to compensate employees in other ways, revised bonus structures, additional benefits, flexible working options, for example. I will also just call out here the need to invest in your recruitment marketing, but in addition to that, and I think Shay highlighted it as well, it's really the importance of EVP, and it shouldn't be underestimated in such a competitive job market. And I think as an organisation, it's essential to present to the market and a potential employee or candidate the why of joining your organisation. And like I said before, people are really looking for their organisation to be much more than just an employer these days. So EVP is hugely important. We're undergoing a huge piece of work actually in our own organisation at the moment in regards to EVP and what that will look like for the future. A couple of tips here for employees or job seekers. I think demand for skilled talent is at an all-time high. This translates to potential massive career progression for candidates with the right skill sets. I think the key there is just to find the right window to make any career move and be sure to understanding exactly what is on offer before taking the plunge, and continue to develop your skills tailored to what different organizations need. Just on that, there was a huge increase in influx on online courses and people choosing to upskill themselves throughout the pandemic, which is excellent, and it does create an opportunity for employers to cast a slightly wider net when attracting talent, as opposed to hiring only a candidate that has done, the exact job before ABC criteria. By widening the net and looking at in what ways somebody has upskilled themselves or taken the initiative to go and conduct a few different courses and whatnot, it enables you to hire the skills you need for the future in a way that, how would I say, isn't necessarily based on what somebody's done in the past. And we can see clients that we work with that are a little bit more open-minded to the candidate profile in this regard have had better results when attracting new employees into the organisation, for sure. Sorry, a bit of background noise there. So on that note, I will pass you back to Liz, I believe.
Excellent. Thanks,
We're going to have a bit of a Q&A.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Kirsty, and thanks, Shay. And I might just sort of kick off. There's been a comment or a question, I should say, in the chat around what is EVP. And thank you. You are correct. EVP is employer value proposition, and it's a really interesting place to start the conversation, as both Kirsty and Shay have highlighted the importance of hybrid working models and other aspects of the broader proposition that we as employers are offering both our existing employees and new hires. And I'm keen to sort of hear from you both to understand hybrid working. Yes, it's obviously impacting the priority of where people will take their job search. What else are you seeing as innovative ways that people are looking to incorporate in their employer value proposition to attract candidates in this hyper competitive market that we've got?
One of the things that I think is really interesting, it's around the articulation of an employer's purpose. So I think that with, as we know, there are many generational differences, and the generation that's currently coming through the workforce from graduate level through to early professional is really seeking an organization that has, yes, it has the hard things like flexible working in terms of working from home or from different environments or different hybrid models, but they're also looking for that purpose. So the organization has got to stand for more than something that's just producing the widget. And how that is articulated is really, really important when, I guess, when an organization's trying to attract and retain staff. So it's not only the attraction bit, because that can be, some kind of plastic veneer you can put on something and make it look, but is this organization living and breathing what it says that it's going to do? And I think that's one of the things that I've seen smart organizations really put a lot of emphasis on. So it's an intangible, but I think it's, innovative organizations are really driving that bit home.
Yeah, I think it's a good point, Shay, and we've got a couple of questions related to the EVP, and I'll probably combine the two because I think it's a good follow-on point that I'm keen to hear from both of you on. Most New Zealand companies are SME by sort of global standards, and coming into the market are not necessarily as well resourced compared to some of the multinationals. So keen to hear how they should go about attracting their best candidates based on their EVP. And then the follow-up question, which I think is interesting, is should a company tweak their EVP to the market that they are entering? So keen, I think, Kirsty, you're probably seeing a lot of New Zealand companies entering Singapore. Shay, likewise, you talked about the tech transformation and the influx of companies, looking to set up a presence there. What's your views on tweaking an EVP based on the market?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with the call out there from Shay. I think defining and articulating an employer's or organization's purpose and being able to set a vision around that and acknowledging that and embracing that through a holistic lens. So, it's social responsibilities as an organization. It's, it's environmental. We have millennials coming through to us, wanting to understand and asking us big questions that I would say, 5-10 years ago, people were not asking us in such detail, questions around, for example, around, who our partnerships are with, what do we do to give back to the community. I think in terms of tailoring it to the market, then yes, depending on, I think as an umbrella and as an organization, you need a clear purpose and vision, but I think you do need to tailor that to the market that you're working in or coming into, reflective of local views, the demographic of your employee base, who you're trying to attract into your organization. I think, yeah, absolutely, it would need some local approach for sure. Yeah.
Excellent. Shay, I'm going to throw one to you, more probably specific New Zealand question. Do you see any evidence to support the view that New Zealand repats will now seek to go abroad again? People that have maybe returned home during the pandemic, and Kirsty, I'm sure you'll agree there was a bit of an exodus over the last couple of years for, in that expat market through personal choice or with the choice being removed from those individuals. Shay, do you see those people sticking in New Zealand, or do you see them maybe looking to head off again?
Look, I think it's going to be a bit of a mix, really, because I think you're going to see those people that return for lifestyle reasons, i.e. looking to start families, looking to buy a house. I think they're going to be pretty settled. They've made the move back. I think for people that were forced back during that period of time, I think it's a little bit different. If people were forced back to have a better quality of life just during that period of time, I think they're now going to be starting to get impacted by cost of living and actually the cost of buying your first house and things like that. Now, we saw petrol the other day hit $3.50, for instance, for a litre of 98. Now that's
crazy.
$3.50. We have seen it plunge back down to $2.99, which was what a win for us all. But I think that cost of living is becoming draining on people. And like I said, I think we've got a real risk of getting raided by Australia now. So if people have repatted back to New Zealand, they could just as easily go to Australia, have a lower cost of living, have a really good lifestyle, almost equivalent to that they're going to have here, and only be 4 hours away. And so that they might find that's actually not a bad middle ground for them. So I think there's a risk of some of those people that have repatted pushing back off again.
Yeah, and I guess an extended question that is aimed at the New Zealand market, but Kirsty, I'd also be interested in your view. What is the broad view in New Zealand in the employer market of returning New Zealanders and the value of the experience that they have got overseas? We hear anecdotally that people's international experience is somewhat recognized, but people, there's it's not relevant to what we're doing here. So keen to hear, and the question specifically is for those who've been away for 20 plus years. So what's your view, and what are your clients telling you about people with extensive international experience? And Shay, if I can go to you, and then Kirsty, I'm keen to hear about that from a Singapore context as well.
No, I think they're because of the way the labour market is, I think they're going to have to consider people with a broad range of extensive international experience. I think when labour market supply was constant, I think there was some reticence there. There's always been reticence in New Zealand around, that they're too big for this role, or they've got too much experience, all those kinds of things that really kind of frustrate me from a local standpoint. I mean, my view is if someone's talented, you just grab them, right? Like that's what you need to do to help your organization grow. Even if they've been working in a market that's not as relevant because of size and scale, you can always morph that skill set into what you're doing if it's a really defined skill set. One thing that's becoming really apparent is that even now people are just going to be wanting international experience regardless if it's 2 years, 20 years, whatever. Because talent is just being recycled in New Zealand at the moment. People are seeing the same names on CVs all the time. So as soon as someone comes in from offshore, they're just going to go, you know what? I'm just going to grab, I haven't seen that name before. I might just grab them. They're going to bring in something that we haven't seen for a while. So I think now's a really good time to market your experience. Before, like I said, a bit of reticence, but I think now it's actually an ideal time.
Yeah, excellent. And Kirsty, I think I'd be interested in your view, because I think the perspective on international experience in Singapore is a slightly different one to New Zealand. What are your clients saying when they see international experience from anywhere, but certainly even from New Zealand as well?
Yeah, I mean, Singapore has always been a international location, and I think despite some of the challenges last year in terms of actual entrance into the country, that willingness is absolutely still there, either hiring foreign talent or returning overseas returnees, so Singaporeans that have gone abroad and coming back to Singapore with international experience. Absolutely is valued. I think the changing nature around or the changing conditions around the employment pass in future will make it harder to attract international talent into certain roles. But the willingness and interest is absolutely still there, and it is valued. Yeah.
Excellent. I'm very conscious of time, and I think we've got time just to answer two more questions. One around and perhaps I can take this in terms of my own experience, but demand for graduates in Singapore. I've got a fellow alumni from Victoria University who's keen to move up here. Look, I think, while there absolutely is huge demand for graduates in Singapore, the immigration complexities can make a brand new graduate moving here a little challenging. And the person who's asked the question has said, am I better off to wait a few years? Unfortunately, the answer is probably yes to that question in terms of simplicity. I don't know, Kirsty, if you'd agree with that comment.
Yeah, I would say, just gain some work experience for a couple of years before making the move across. Would be my recommendation.
Yeah. And look, the final question, that's actually aimed at New Zealand, but I'm going to preface it with a Singapore context. The Singapore government has been very proactive around funding for employers who will, I guess, reskill people. So reskill people from one industry to another. There's a concept called professional conversion program where employees from certain industries are able to reskill into a new industry. And there's a lot of financial support for employers who sign up to the program. So a bit of a win-win situation there. The question for you both is, in New Zealand particularly, but what is the current appetite for professionals changing industries mid-career for a new profession? Maybe Shay, if I can throw to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question, right? I mean, it's tough insofar as people often have transferable skills and really good transferable skills that they can bring across. But going into a completely new industry without any practical experience, it's a pretty tough one to sell. I think what my advice would be to actually do some training in the background. And even if it's getting some voluntary experience within another certain industry, try and do that before just making the leap. If you're happy to go back and retrain, as some of the programs that you've talked about before that are available in Singapore, then that's absolutely fine. But it's always a bit of a risk because we don't have as advanced training, or the programs that you're talking about sound fantastic and extremely relevant, especially given today's working environment. We haven't seen that. It's not that advanced in New Zealand.
Yeah, sure. Look, I'm very conscious of time and I want to be respectful of the time we've had. The time has flown. And I wanted to say a very big thank you, Kirsty and Shay, for spending your time with us today. Both the insights and the content you've shared have been incredibly insightful and hopefully given our participants a lot of food for thought. If you're interested in connecting with either Shay or Kirsty on LinkedIn and asking them more personal questions, I'm sure I'm not overstepping the mark to say that they would be comfortable for you to do that. Thank you again to the Business Alliance Network for putting on the webinar, and to the New Zealand Chamber. I've really enjoyed the session, and thank you all for your participation. Enjoy the rest of your Monday afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Right, thank you.